A karate champion challenged what he thought was just another wannabe martial artist at a local diner, mocking the quiet stranger reading alone in the corner booth. The cocky tournament winner and his crew surrounded the elderly man, demanding he prove his skills or admit he was a fake. But this gray-haired stranger wasn't some weekend warrior. This was Steven Seagal himself, the aikido master who'd been taking down criminals for decades. The arrogant fighter had no idea he just insulted a federal agent who could break necks with his bare hands before most people could blink. While the champion flexed and postured for his laughing friends, the legendary action hero sat in perfect stillness, his dark eyes calculating every possible way to end this confrontation. The waitress recognized the danger and stepped back, knowing she was about to witness something extraordinary. The young fighter kept pushing, unaware he was prodding a sleeping dragon who'd spent 50 years perfecting the art of using an opponent's own force against them. What happens when a tournament champion picks a fight with Hollywood's deadliest martial artist? Will the bully survive, discovering why some legends are built on real skills? What happened next would shake the arrogant fighter to his very core. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Moretti's diner. As Steven settled into his usual corner booth, the worn vinyl creaking softly beneath his considerable frame. At 71, he still commanded attention without seeking it. 6 feet 4 inches of lean muscle beneath a simple black shirt, his distinguished gray ponytail falling past his shoulders like a silver waterfall. The book in his weathered hands, The Art of Peace, by Morihei Ueshiba, showed the careful wear of frequent reading. "More coffee, hon?" Dolores Martinez approached with the pot, her warm brown eyes crinkling behind reading glasses. At 68, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades caring for others. "Please." Steven's voice carried the measured cadence of a man who'd learned the value of few words. "Your granddaughter, she's doing well in her training?" Dolores's face lit up. "Jenny's got her brown belt test next month. That boy Derek pushes her hard, but she's got spirit." She refilled his cup, the steam rising between them. "You know about martial arts?" Steven's dark eyes held depths that spoke of years spent mastering more than just philosophy. "A little." The diner hummed with quiet morning conversation, construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, elderly regulars reading newspapers, the comfortable rhythm of a community gathering place. Steven appreciated the anonymity it offered, the simple pleasure of watching ordinary people live ordinary lives. For 2 weeks now, he'd maintained this routine, finding peace in the predictable kindness of strangers who saw only a polite customer. Not the complex history that had brought him here. He turned a page, his movements deliberate and economical. The words of the Aikido founder resonated with truths learned through decades of applying them in situations far removed from peaceful dojos. True victory is victory over oneself. Steven had spent a lifetime learning that lesson, teaching it to others, living by its demands. Outside, Henderson, Nevada stretched toward distant mountains under a cloudless sky. Somewhere in this quiet suburb, people were planning harm to the innocent. Soon enough, he would have to abandon this peaceful interlude and return to the work that had defined his adult life. But for now, in this moment, there was only the warmth of the coffee, the wisdom of ancient words, and the gentle kindness of a grandmother who asked no questions beyond whether he needed more cream. Steven closed the book and left exact change, plus a generous tip. Rising to his full height, he bowed slightly to Dolores, a gesture that seemed natural rather than theatrical. She watched through the window as he drove toward the desert mountains, her instincts telling her there was far more to the quiet stranger than met the eye. The sharp crack of Derek Vance's fist against the heavy bag echoed through Victory Martial Arts Academy, punctuating the rhythmic sounds of 30 students training in synchronized kata. At 32, Derek moved with the controlled violence of someone who'd learned to fight for survival before he'd learned to fight for sport. His military-cropped brown hair showed not a trace of gray, and his red and black GI bore the patches of a 3-time Nevada state champion. "Focus on your breathing, Martinez," Derek called to 16-year-old Jenny, whose long, dark ponytail whipped as she executed a spinning heel kick. "Power comes from your center, not your shoulders. Ginny adjusted her stance, her intelligent brown eyes reflecting the same determined spirit her grandmother possessed. Despite being the youngest in the advanced class, she commanded respect through dedication rather than natural ability. Her kicks lacked the raw power of the adult students, but her form was nearly flawless, the result of 3 years spent treating martial arts as philosophy rather than mere physical exercise. The academy buzzed with the energy of serious training. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting the disciplined movements of students ranging from 8 to 58 years old. Motivational posters featuring legendary martial artists watched over the controlled chaos, their presence a reminder that today's training connected to centuries of warrior tradition. Derek paused his bag work, watching his students with genuine pride. Each represented a small victory against the forces that sought to make people victims. The single mothers learning to protect themselves, the bullied teenagers finding confidence, the veterans working through trauma by rediscovering their physical capabilities. This was why he'd opened the academy after his discharge, to transform the destructive skills the Marine Corps had taught him into something that built people up rather than tearing them down. Sensei Derek. Brad Kowalski, a 24-year-old construction worker, held up his phone. Check this out. My tournament highlight reel already has 5,000 views. Derek grinned, unable to suppress the pride that had been growing with each victory. 3 consecutive state championships had brought attention he'd never experienced, and if he was honest, he was starting to enjoy it. Local newspapers wanted interviews. Martial arts magazines were calling. Students were enrolling specifically to train with the Derek Vance. The heavy oak doors opened as Tony Ricci's stocky frame appeared, motor oil staining his work shirt and good-natured skepticism written across his weathered features. You ready for lunch, champ? Or are you too famous to eat with us working stiffs now? Derek laughed, but Tony's words carried an edge of genuine concern that only best friends were allowed to voice. The mechanic had watched his friend's personality shift subtly with each tournament victory, pride gradually transforming into something less attractive. Success was intoxicating, and Derek was drinking deeply from that particular well. The lunch rush at Moretti's diner brought its usual symphony of clinking plates and animated conversation, but Derek's table managed to dominate the soundscape. He entered with the swagger of someone riding high on recent success, followed by Tony and 3 academy students who hung on every word about his latest tournament performance. I'm telling you guys, the semifinal opponent didn't know what hit him, Derek boasted, sliding into the booth 2 tables away from where Steven sat quietly with his book and green tea. One combination, jab, cross, spinning heel kick, and it was over. Brad Kowalski nodded enthusiastically. The video's already got 20,000 views. Derek's going viral. Steven glanced up briefly, taking in the group's dynamics with the practiced eye of someone trained to read social situations. The young men's energy was infectious but undisciplined, their excitement masking an underlying hunger for validation that he recognized from his own youth. He returned to his reading, content to remain invisible. Hey, check out the wannabe over there. Derek's voice carried just loud enough to be heard. He gestured towards Steven with a dismissive nod. Probably thinks he's some kind of mysterious martial artist. Look at that ponytail. What is this? 1985. Mike Chun, a 22-year-old college student, squirmed uncomfortably. Maybe we should just order, man. But Derek was gaining momentum, fed by his friends' nervous laughter and the attention from other diners. Success had made him hungry for more validation, and the quiet stranger represented an easy target for his growing arrogance. I bet he's watched every Steven Seagal movie twice and thinks that makes him dangerous. These weekend warriors kill me. All mystique, no substance. Tony shot his friend a warning look. Derek, come on. Guy's just trying to eat in peace. Peace. Derek's voice rose another notch. That's exactly what I'm talking about. All this Zen master bullshit when real martial artists are out here proving themselves in actual competition. Steven's movements remained perfectly controlled as he turned another page, but something subtle shifted in his posture, a barely perceptible straightening that suggested coiled energy beneath the calm exterior. His dark eyes never left the text, but his awareness expanded to encompass every detail of the increasingly hostile attention. Dolores approached Derek's table with forced cheer, coffee pot in hand. You boys ready to order? In a minute, Dolores, Derek said, his attention still focused on Steven. I'm just wondering if your quiet customer over there might want to share some of his ancient wisdom with us mere mortals. The diner had grown noticeably quieter, other patrons sensing the tension building between the tables. Steven closed his book with deliberate care, his weathered hands steady as he met Derek's challenging stare for the first time. The contact lasted only seconds, but something in those patient dark eyes made Derek's pulse quicken, not with fear, but with an inexplicable need to prove himself against this unexpected resistance. Steven's calm gaze returned to his closed book, but Derek interpreted the dismissal as weakness rather than restraint. The champion's chair scraped against linoleum as he stood, his friends exchanging worried glances but lacking the courage to intervene. The atmosphere in the diner shifted like barometric pressure before a storm. "Excuse me." Derek approached Steven's booth with the predatory confidence of someone accustomed to physical dominance. "My friends and I were wondering, what's your background in martial arts?" Steven looked up slowly, his weathered face showing no trace of irritation or fear. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured cadence of someone who chose words carefully. "I practice a little. Nothing worth discussing. Nothing worth discussing." Derek's laugh held an edge. "Come on, man. The whole mysterious Zen master thing might work on civilians, but I've been training since I was 12. Marine Corps, 3 state championships, real competition against real fighters." The other patrons had abandoned any pretense of minding their own business. Dolores hovered nearby, torn between intervening and recognizing that some confrontations had their own inevitable momentum. Her grandmother's instincts were screaming warnings, but decades of serving difficult customers had taught her when to step back. Steven's response came in the same patient tone. "Congratulations on your achievements. Would you like to join me for coffee?" "My treat." The offer, delivered without a trace of sarcasm, somehow felt more challenging than any insult. Derek's jaw tightened as his friends shuffled closer, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by growing unease. Something about the stranger's absolute stillness was beginning to unsettle them. "I think what my friend here is trying to say," Tony interjected, placing a restraining hand on Derek's shoulder, "is that we should probably—" "No." Derek shrugged off the contact. "What I'm trying to say is simple. This whole mysterious sage routine gets old. Either you know something about fighting, or you don't. Either you can back up the image, or you're just another wannabe hiding behind philosophy." Steven considered this for a long moment, his dark eyes studying Derek with what might have been compassion. Years of experience had taught him to recognize the desperation beneath such challenges, the need for validation that drove young men to seek conflict where none existed. "True strength doesn't require proving, son. The greatest victories are won without fighting." That's exactly the kind of fortune cookie wisdom I'm talking about. Derek's voice carried throughout the diner now. "How about this? Victory Martial Arts Academy, 7 tonight. Come show us what all that inner peace is worth in a real demonstration." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished match. Steven's gaze never wavered as he processed not just the words, but the pain beneath them, the desperate hunger for significance that made the young man so dangerous to himself and others. 7 o'clock, Steven agreed quietly. "But just us. No audience, no cameras. A private conversation between martial artists." Derek's handshake was deliberately firm, designed to test and intimidate. Steven's grip felt like weathered iron wrapped in silk, controlled, unshakable, and somehow gentle despite its obvious strength. For just a moment, Derek wondered if he'd made a serious mistake, but pride pushed the doubt aside. As Steven left exact change and walked toward the door, Dolores caught his arm. "Be careful tonight," she whispered. "That boy's got more anger than sense." Steven nodded, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes the greatest service we can provide is helping someone discover who they really are. The parking lot outside Moretti's diner shimmered with desert heat as Tony grabbed Derek's arm, his mechanic's grip strong enough to stop his friend mid-stride. His weathered face showed the concern of someone watching a loved one walk toward a cliff. "Derek, we need to talk. Right now. What's your problem?" Derek shook free, still riding the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Guy wanted to play mysterious, so I called his bluff." Tony pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen with uncharacteristic urgency. That's what I'm trying to tell you, man. Look at this. He held up a series of images, promotional stills from action movies spanning 3 decades, all featuring the same unmistakable figure with the gray ponytail and penetrating dark eyes. Derek studied the photos, his expression shifting from dismissive to uncertain. The resemblance was uncanny, but his pride wouldn't allow him to acknowledge the possibility. Come on, Tony. Lots of guys try to look like celebrities. It's probably just some loser capitalizing on the resemblance. Listen to yourself. Tony's voice carried the frustration of watching a friend march toward disaster. The height matches 6'4". The voice, the way he moves, even how he holds his hands. That's Steven Seagal, Derek. The actual Steven Seagal. Bullshit. But Derek's voice lacked conviction now. He thought about the stranger's grip, the way those dark eyes had seemed to look straight through him, the absolute stillness that had surrounded the man like an invisible force field. Something about the encounter had triggered recognition at a level deeper than conscious thought. Tony scrolled through more recent photos. Steven at environmental rallies, teaching at martial arts seminars, his presence still commanding despite his age. You think aikido has an expiration date? You think decades of experience just disappear because a guy turns 70? Derek's teammates clustered around the phone, their earlier bravado evaporating as they absorbed the implications. Brad Kowalski whistled low. Dude, if that's really him. It's not, Derek insisted, but his military training was kicking in, the part of his mind that analyzed threats and calculated odds. The way the stranger had sat perfectly balanced, ready to move in any direction. The economy of motion that spoke of ingrained muscle memory. The calm that came not from ignorance of danger, but from intimate familiarity with it. Inside the diner, Steven approached Dolores at the register, his movements carrying the same deliberate precision that had caught Derek's attention. Your granddaughter trains at the academy? 3 years now. Dolores nodded, accepting payment for his meal. Jenny's got her brown belt test coming up. Why do you ask? Steven's expression grew thoughtful. Sometimes good intentions lead to dangerous situations. If she's not at the academy tonight, that would be wise. Dolores studied his weathered face, her grandmother's instincts reading volumes in his careful words. Decades of raising children and grandchildren had taught her to recognize when adults were worried about more than they were saying. You're not just talking about some friendly sparring match, are you? I hope that's all it is, Steven replied. But it's best to be prepared for complications. Outside, Derek watched through the window as the stranger, Steven, bowed slightly to Dolores before walking to his modest rental car. Even that simple gesture carried a formal precision that spoke of decades of disciplined practice. Tony was still scrolling through articles. Listen to this. Seagal continues environmental activism work while maintaining ties to law enforcement community. Derek, what if this guy's not just some retired actor? What if he's still active? Derek's jaw tightened as doubt crept in, but backing down now would mean losing face in front of his students. The pride that had driven him to 3 state championships wouldn't let him admit he might have challenged someone completely out of his league. 7 o'clock, he muttered, stalking toward his truck. We'll see what the old man's really made of. The setting sun painted Victory Martial Arts Academy in shades of amber and gold as students and spectators filtered through the entrance despite Derek's promise to keep the demonstration private. Word had spread through the tight-knit martial arts community with the speed of wildfire. Derek Vance, 3-time state champion, facing off against a mysterious challenger who might or might not be a Hollywood legend. Tony arrived early, his toolbox clanking as he set up a folding chair near the edge of the training mat. The familiar weight of his tools provided comfort in what was shaping up to be an uncomfortable evening. This is a bad idea, Derek. You can still call it off. Derek was already warming up, throwing sharp combinations at the heavy bag with mechanical precision. Each strike landed with satisfying impact, the familiar rhythm helping calm his pre-fight nerves. 25 people, Tony. 25 people came to watch me back down from some old man. The academy buzzed with anticipatory energy. Jenny Martinez sat cross-legged in the front row, her dark eyes bright with excitement at seeing her instructor demonstrate advanced techniques. Local black belts from other schools had materialized, drawn by rumors and curiosity. Even Mrs. Henderson, from the karate supply store had closed early to witness what promised to be either an impressive display of skill or a spectacular embarrassment. "Sensei Derek," Jenny called out, "is it true you're fighting Steven Seagal?" Derek's kick snapped, the heavy bag sideways. "I'm demonstrating technique with a gentleman who thinks he knows something about martial arts. That's all." But his students weren't buying the casual dismissal. They'd seen their instructor demolish tournament opponents with clinical efficiency, watched him break boards and concrete blocks with devastating power. Yet something in Derek's body language suggested uncertainty beneath the bravado, a tension that had nothing to do with normal pre-competition nerves. The academy's atmosphere grew electric as anticipation built. Students whispered among themselves, sharing theories about the mysterious challenger. Some had Googled images on their phones, comparing them to eyewitness descriptions from the diner. The consensus was divided, but everyone agreed they were about to witness something unusual. At exactly 7 o'clock, the academy's front door opened with a soft chime. Stephen entered wearing a traditional black GI that somehow managed to look both simple and expensive. The fabric fell perfectly across his shoulders, and his movements carried the fluid precision of someone for whom martial arts had become as natural as breathing. The room fell silent as conversations died mid-sentence. Stephen's presence filled the space without effort, not through intimidation, but through a quality of focused attention that made everyone suddenly aware of their own movements. He bowed deeply to the small shrine Derek had erected in one corner, his respect for the sacred space apparent in every gesture. "Thank you for honoring our traditions," Derek said, some of his tension easing at this sign of proper etiquette. Stephen nodded, then settled into seiza position on the edge of the mat, kneeling with perfect posture, hands resting lightly on his thighs, eyes closed in meditation. The transformation was remarkable. One moment he'd been an elderly man entering a room. The next he'd become something timeless and centered, as immovable as a mountain. Dolores Martinez appeared in the doorway, her face creased with worry. She'd closed the diner early, unable to shake the feeling that the kind stranger who'd helped her with her car battery was walking into something dangerous. Jenny waved her over, making room on the floor beside her. "Grandmother, you came. Wouldn't miss it, Mija," Dolores murmured. But her eyes remained fixed on Stephen's motionless form. Something about his absolute stillness reminded her of her late husband before important missions, the calm that came from accepting whatever outcome awaited. Derek finished his warm-up routine and faced his opponent across the mat. Stephen's eyes opened slowly, dark and patient as deep water. The demonstration began with formal bows, Derek's sharp military precision contrasting with Stephen's flowing reverence. As they faced each other across the mat, the difference in their approaches became immediately apparent. Derek coiled with kinetic energy like a compressed spring, Stephen radiating the serene confidence of someone for whom conflict held no mystery. "Please," Stephen gestured with open hands, "show me what you've learned." Derek launched into his competition kata, a dynamic sequence of blocks, strikes, and kicks that had earned him countless trophies. His technique was flawless, sharp angles, explosive power, textbook form that demonstrated years of dedicated training. The watching students murmured appreciation at particularly impressive combinations, recognizing the skill that had made their instructor a champion. When Derek finished, Stephen nodded respectfully. "Beautiful execution. Your instructors taught you well." Then Stephen began to move, and the atmosphere in the room shifted like pressure changing before a storm. Where Derek's kata had been angular and forceful, Stephen's demonstration flowed like water finding its path through stone. Each movement contained multiple applications. What appeared to be a simple raising of hands revealed itself as simultaneous block, strike, and throw. His footwork created geometric patterns that placed him exactly where he needed to be when he needed to be there. "Your turn," Stephen said quietly, inviting Derek to apply his techniques. Derek approached with a basic straight punch, confident in his speed and power. Stephen's response was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely, a slight shift of weight, a gentle redirection of Derek's arm, and suddenly the champion found his own momentum carrying him past his target while Stephen remained perfectly centered. Again, Stephen encouraged. Derek tried a more complex combination, jab, cross, hook. putting real speed behind the techniques. This time Steven moved like smoke, each punch passing harmlessly through space where he'd been a heartbeat before. To the watching crowd, it appeared as if Derek was fighting shadows while Steven danced between raindrops. Frustration crept into Derek's movements as he escalated to his tournament-winning techniques. Spinning kicks, jumping attacks, the explosive combinations that had devastated opponents across 3 state championships. Steven deflected them all with minimal effort, using Derek's own force against him, demonstrating the aikido principle that the greatest strength was often the gentlest response. How? Derek paused, breathing hard while Steven remained utterly composed. How are you doing that? You're fighting against yourself, Steven explained, his voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher. Each attack creates its own counter. I simply follow the path your energy provides. Jenny Martinez watched with growing understanding, recognizing in Steven's movements the philosophical principles her grandmother had tried to teach her about life. How force often defeated itself, how patience could overcome aggression, how true strength lay in knowing when not to use it. Derek wiped sweat from his forehead, his competitive pride warring with grudging respect. This wasn't just technique, it was art elevated to something approaching magic. He gathered himself for one final attempt, his signature spinning heel kick, the technique that had won his last 3 major tournaments. The kick launched with devastating precision, Derek's entire body rotating to generate maximum power. Steven stepped aside at the last possible instant, his hand barely touching Derek's shoulder as the champion spun past. A gentle tap that could have been a lethal strike delivered to any number of vital points as Derek completed his rotation. Off balance and vulnerable, the Academy's front door exploded inward. 3 men in tactical gear burst through the entrance, assault rifles trained on the startled crowd. The leader, a scarred operative with cold blue eyes, swept his weapon across the room with professional efficiency while his associates moved to block the exits with military precision. Nobody moves, nobody dies, Marcus Webb announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. We're looking for the retired federal agent who's been asking questions about our business. The transformation in Steven was instantaneous and terrifying. The peaceful aikido master vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous, a predator awakening after years of dormancy. His posture shifted subtly, weight settling into a combat stance that radiated lethal capability despite his age. Derek froze mid-bow, his tournament experience utterly inadequate for this reality. The students pressed against the walls, their excited chatter replaced by the sharp breathing of barely controlled panic. Jenny reached instinctively for her grandmother's hand, her martial arts training providing no preparation for armed violence. Steven Seagal, Webb continued, his rifle now aimed directly at Steven's chest. Former CIA, current pain in my ass. You've been investigating our money laundering operation, haven't you? Following the tournament circuit, tracking our recruitment methods. Steven's hands remained visible but ready, his dark eyes calculating angles and distances with the speed of long experience. Every detail of the room registered in his tactical awareness: weapon positions, escape routes, civilian locations. Let the civilians go. This is between us. Civilians. Webb's laugh held no humor. These aren't civilians, they're witnesses. And that young champion there. He gestured toward Derek with his rifle barrel. He's exactly the kind of talent my employer likes to recruit. Former military, tournament proven, just stupid enough to think he's invincible. One of Webb's associates, a thick-set man with Slavic features, moved closer to the crowd. Boss, we should clear out. Local police are 20 minutes away at minimum, Webb finished. Plenty of time to clean up loose ends. Dolores stood slowly, her grandmother's courage overriding her fear. Please, these are good kids. They haven't done anything wrong. Webb's rifle swung toward her, but Steven's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Touch her, and you'll discover exactly why your employer sent 3 men instead of 1. The threat was delivered in the same measured tone Steven had used to discuss philosophy, which somehow made it infinitely more menacing. Webb's associates shifted nervously, recognizing something in Steven's bearing that their leader's arrogance had missed. Big words from a has-been actor, Webb sneered. but his finger moved to his rifle's trigger guard. Viktor Kozlov sends his regards, along with a message: "Stop investigating our business, or we start killing people you care about." Jenny squeezed her grandmother's hand tighter, her martial arts training providing no preparation for this reality. Derek remained paralyzed by the gap between his tournament fantasies and the brutal efficiency of actual violence. Steven's response came with the patient finality of someone stating natural law. "The only message that will be delivered tonight is this: there are still people in this world who won't let evil flourish unchallenged." Webb's rifle centered on Steven's chest as his finger found the trigger, but the federal agent's dark eyes showed no fear, only the calm acceptance of someone who had chosen long ago which battles were worth dying for. The academy that moments before had echoed with the respectful clash of martial arts. Demonstration now held only the sound of controlled breathing and the soft click of weapons being readied for use. Webb's finger tightened on the trigger, but Steven was already moving with the liquid speed that had made him legendary. His left hand swept upward in a classic Irimi movement, deflecting Dmitry Volkov's rifle barrel toward the ceiling as his right struck the Russian's wrist with surgical precision. The weapon clattered across the hardwood floor as Steven's hip throw sent the 200-pound operative crashing into the heavy bag with bone-jarring force. Carlos Santos, positioned near the back exit, swung his rifle toward the threat, but Steven had anticipated the movement. A single step brought him within striking distance, his elbow finding the exact pressure point that would render Santos's right arm temporarily useless. As the gunman stumbled backward, Steven guided his momentum into a textbook aikido throw that sent him sliding across the mat unconscious. The entire sequence lasted less than 4 seconds. Derek stood frozen, his tournament experience revealed as child's play compared to the lethal ballet he'd just witnessed. The students pressed against the walls, their faces reflecting shock at seeing their philosophical art transformed into something devastatingly practical. But Webb still held his rifle trained on the crowd, and more importantly, Dolores Martinez remained within arm's reach of his position. The tactical leader's scarred face showed professional respect rather than surprise. He'd expected Steven to be dangerous. "Impressive," Webb acknowledged, pressing his rifle's muzzle against Dolores's temple. "But predictable. Drop the hero act, or grandmother here discovers what a .223 round does to gray matter." Steven's hands rose slowly, his dark eyes never leaving Webb's face. "Let her go. I'm the one you want." "You're the one Kozlov wants dead," Webb corrected. "But my orders are to bring you in alive if possible. Seems the boss has questions about how deep your investigation goes. Who else might be involved?" Jenny's quiet sob cut through the tension as her grandmother's eyes closed in prayer. Derek watched helplessly, his 3 state championships meaningless, against the reality of a gun pressed to an innocent woman's head. "Your choice, Seagal," Webb continued. "Come quietly, and maybe some of these people live to see tomorrow. Keep playing action hero, and I start executing civilians until you remember how math works." Steven's shoulders sagged in apparent defeat, his legendary composure cracking under the weight of protecting others. "What do you want me to do?" Webb produced zip ties from his tactical vest, tossing them at Steven's feet. "Hands behind your back. Move slowly. Keep those aikido tricks to yourself." As Steven knelt and placed his hands behind him, Derek felt something die inside his chest. The naive belief that good always triumphed over evil, that heroes never had to make impossible choices. The man who'd effortlessly demonstrated the beauty of martial arts mastery was submitting to thugs because protecting others mattered more than personal glory. Webb zip-tied Steven's wrists with professional efficiency while keeping his rifle pressed against Dolores's skull. "Smart choice. Victor's going to enjoy breaking you down piece by piece." "The others," Steven said quietly. "You have what you came for." "Do I?" Webb's smile held no warmth. "See, that's where you're wrong, old man. This whole demonstration was perfect cover, but we've been watching longer than you think. We know about your morning routine, your conversations with waitress here, your interest in the academy." Webb's black SUV moved through Henderson's industrial district with practiced efficiency. Derek and Steven zip-tied in the back seat, while classical music played softly from the vehicle's premium sound system. The civilized soundtrack created a surreal counterpoint to the kidnapping in progress. You're probably wondering how we found you, Webb said conversationally, adjusting his rearview mirror to study his captives. Facial recognition software, cross-referenced with known federal agents. Amazing what technology can accomplish these days. Steven remained silent, but his dark eyes cataloged every detail of their route: street names, landmarks, the industrial buildings that grew more isolated with each mile. His CIA training had prepared him for this possibility. The key was staying calm and gathering intelligence while waiting for opportunity. Derek struggled against his restraints until Webb's voice cut through his efforts. Save your energy, champion. You're going to need it. For what? Derek's voice cracked slightly. Webb's reflection smiled in the mirror. Viktor Kozlov runs the most sophisticated criminal organization on the West Coast. Money laundering, human trafficking, illegal gambling. But his real passion is underground fighting. He scouts talent at legitimate tournaments, then recruits the best fighters for his private matches. The SUV turned into an industrial complex dominated by converted warehouses, their windows painted black to prevent observation from outside. Security cameras tracked their approach while armed guards nodded recognition at Webb's vehicle. Your tournament record caught our attention months ago, Webb continued, guiding the SUV toward a loading dock. Former Marine, proven combat effectiveness, just arrogant enough to think you're invincible. Perfect candidate for our operation. Steven's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. You've been targeting him specifically. Among others, Webb confirmed. Amazing how many young fighters are willing to risk everything for the right price, especially when they think they're unbeatable. The warehouse's interior revealed the scope of Kozlov's operation: rows of cages containing young men and women in various states of defeat, computer stations monitoring financial transactions across multiple screens, and a central area configured as a professional fighting ring. The smell of fear and violence permeated the stale air. Derek's stomach lurched as he recognized several faces among the prisoners. Fighters he'd competed against over the past year. Champions from other states who'd simply vanished from the tournament circuit. Jesus Christ. No divine intervention here, Webb observed, prodding them toward a reinforced holding area. Just economics. Winners generate betting revenue and attract high-paying spectators. Losers, he gestured toward a group of cages where emaciated figures huddled in despair. Well, human trafficking is surprisingly profitable when you already have the infrastructure in place. A massive monitor dominated one wall, displaying Viktor Kozlov's weathered face via satellite link from what appeared to be a luxurious Miami office. The crime boss studied Steven with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to reducing human beings to their monetary value. So, Kozlov's Russian accent carried clearly through the speakers. The famous Steven Seagal comes to visit. How flattering. Steven met the camera's gaze with calm defiance. Your operation ends tonight. Kozlov's laugh held genuine amusement. My operation has been expanding for 15 years. Federal task forces, local police, even international authorities, they all eventually discover that some problems are too profitable to solve. Derek stared at the cages surrounding them, his competitive pride transforming into horrified understanding. Every tournament he'd won, every victory celebration, had been observed by predators who saw potential merchandise rather than athletic achievement. The beauty of the fighting circuit, Webb explained, unlocking their designated cage, is that it provides perfect cover for recruitment. Young athletes disappear all the time: training accidents, career changes, family emergencies. Who questions a fighter's decision to pursue opportunities elsewhere? The holding cage measured 10 feet by 12 feet, furnished with a single bench and a bucket that served purposes Derek preferred not to contemplate. Steven sat in meditation posture despite his bound hands, his breathing steady and controlled, while Derek paced the narrow confines like a caged animal. I'm sorry, Derek said for the third time in 10 minutes. My stupid ego got you into this. Steven's eyes opened, focusing on his cellmate with patient understanding. Your challenge at the diner didn't create this situation, it revealed it. These people have been operating for years. But if you hadn't, they would have found another way to draw me out, Steven interrupted gently. Predators are patient. They study their targets, identify weaknesses, exploit opportunities. Your academy was always going to be a target because of what it represents. Derek slumped onto the bench, his hands still zip-tied behind his back. What does it represent? Hope, Stephen replied simply. Young people learning discipline, building confidence, discovering their own strength. That terrifies men like Webb because strong people are harder to victimize. Around them, the warehouse hummed with criminal activity. Computer terminals processed financial transactions while armed guards rotated through security positions. Other prisoners called out occasionally, pleas for water, requests for medical attention, desperate attempts to maintain human connection in an environment designed to strip away dignity. How do we get out of here? Derek asked. That Stephen's response came in the same measured tone he'd used to discuss philosophy at the diner. First, we accept our current situation without panic. Panic clouds judgment. Second, we gather information about our captors' routines, weaknesses, and probable responses to different scenarios. As if to demonstrate, Stephen began describing what he'd observed during their brief transit through the facility: guard rotations, camera positions, the location of emergency exits, and potential weapons. His CIA training had cataloged every detail automatically, building a tactical picture even while zip-tied and imprisoned. Third, Stephen continued, we prepare ourselves mentally and physically for action when opportunity presents itself. Derek watched in fascination as Stephen began working his shoulders and wrists within the constraints of his bonds. The movements were subtle, nearly invisible, but Derek could see they were designed to maintain circulation and flexibility while testing the strength of their restraints. Your military training covered escape and evasion? Stephen asked. Basic survival stuff, Derek admitted. Nothing like this. The principles are the same, Stephen assured him. Patience, observation, decisive action when the moment is right. But Derek, his voice carried new urgency. When we move, our priority isn't escape. It's protecting the innocent people being held here. Derek nodded, finally understanding the lesson his aikido demonstration had been trying to teach. True martial arts wasn't about personal victory. It was about serving something greater than oneself. A hidden ceramic blade, thin as paper and sharp as a razor, had been sewn into Stephen's GI collar, a precaution that spoke to decades of operating in hostile environments. Working carefully to avoid observation, he began cutting through their zip-tie restraints. The guards changed shifts in 30 minutes, Stephen observed quietly. That's our window. Freedom came in stages, first their hands, then the cage lock. Yielded to Stephen's improvised lock picks fashioned from the ceramic blade's fragments. Derek marveled at his companion's preparation, wondering how many similar situations had taught Stephen to hide tools in his clothing. They moved through the warehouse's shadows with Stephen leading, his movements so silent that Derek struggled to match his stealth despite military training. Other prisoners watched hopefully as they passed, but Stephen shook his head minutely. Any attempt at mass liberation would trigger alarms before they could coordinate an effective escape. The warehouse's layout revealed itself as they navigated between shipping containers and computer stations. Webb's operation was more sophisticated than either man had imagined. Dozens of employees processing what appeared to be legitimate business transactions that undoubtedly concealed massive money laundering activities. Security office, Stephen whispered, indicating a raised platform overlooking the main floor. We need to see their surveillance setup. Derek followed, his respect for Stephen's tactical knowledge growing with each calculated risk. This wasn't the philosophical warrior from the academy. This was a professional operative with decades of experience in hostile environments. The security station contained banks of monitors displaying feeds from dozens of cameras throughout the complex. More importantly, it revealed the scope of Webb's prisoner operation. 3 separate buildings housed different aspects of the criminal enterprise, with their current locations serving as the primary holding facility. Stephen's face hardened as he studied the feeds. Children, he said quietly, indicating monitors showing a building where figures too small to be adults moved behind chain-link barriers. Derek felt sick. His tournament victories, his pride in physical achievement, seemed meaningless in the face of such systematic evil. How many? Too many, Stephen replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who devoted his life to fighting this particular darkness. And more arriving every day through the tournament recruitment pipeline. Alarms suddenly shrieked throughout the complex as Webb's voice echoed from speakers. Lockdown protocol initiated. Our guests have decided to tour the facilities without permission. Emergency lighting bathed the warehouse in hellish red as steel barriers began descending over exits. Steven and Derek found themselves trapped in the security station as armed guards converged on their position from multiple directions. But the monitors revealed something else. In one of the auxiliary buildings, cages held familiar faces. Jenny Martinez sat with three other academy students, their martial arts GIs torn and dirty, but their spirits apparently unbroken. They took the kids. Derek breathed. Steven's expression transformed into something that would have terrified Webb if the criminal had been present to witness it. Then this stops being about survival and becomes about justice. Webb's amplified voice continued. Mr. Seagal, your escape attempt was impressive but pointless. Return to your cage, and the children live to see tomorrow. Continue this foolishness, and I start executing them one by one. On the monitors, armed guards entered the building where Jenny and the others were held. The tactical situation had shifted decisively against them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now had innocent lives hanging in the balance, Steven studied. The surveillance feeds with the intensity of someone calculating odds in a game where failure meant watching children die. Derek, he said quietly, how much do you trust me? With my life, Derek replied without hesitation. Good, Steven said, reaching for the security station's fire alarm. Because what happens next is going to require absolute faith in each other. The fire alarm's piercing wail transformed the warehouse into controlled chaos as Steven's gambit triggered automatic emergency protocols. Sprinkler systems activated throughout the complex, soaking computer equipment and forcing guards to cover sensitive electronics. Emergency lighting strobed in conflicting patterns, creating a disorienting maze of shadows and harsh illumination. Derek watched in amazement as Steven's tactical mind turned the building's safety systems into weapons. Water cascading from ceiling. Sprinklers short-circuited several surveillance monitors, creating blind spots in Webb's observation network. The deafening alarm made radio communication nearly impossible, forcing guards to rely on hand signals and shouted orders. Now we move, Steven said, leading Derek toward an emergency exit that had automatically unlocked when the fire system activated. Stay close, stay quiet, and remember, we're not trying to escape. We're repositioning for a better fight. Outside, Henderson's industrial district stretched under a star-filled sky, the warehouse complex revealed as a fortress of criminal activity hidden in plain sight. Steven oriented himself quickly, his trained eyes cataloging escape routes, potential weapons, and defensive positions while Derek struggled to process the scope of what they'd discovered. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night. Multiple engines, coordinated timing, the unmistakable signature of reinforcements arriving. But as headlights swept across the parking area, Derek recognized the lead vehicle with a surge of hope. That's Tony's truck, he said, pointing toward the familiar tow truck leading a convoy of civilian vehicles. The rescue convoy consisted of 15 vehicles, pickup trucks, SUVs, and Tony Ricci's tow truck leading the charge. Doors slammed as worried parents, off-duty security guards, and academy students emerged, armed with whatever they'd been able to gather on short notice. The sight of ordinary citizens mobilizing to rescue their neighbors filled Derek with pride and terror in equal measure. Derek, Tony's voice carried across the lot as he spotted his friend. Jesus, man, we thought you were dead. Detective Ray Moretti emerged from an unmarked police car, his badge visible on his belt and a tactical vest over his civilian clothes. We've been tracking this location for hours, he called to Steven. FBI is en route, but there's still 20 minutes out. Steven's expression remained cautious despite the apparent rescue. Years of federal service had taught him that convenient timing often masked deadly traps. How did you find us? Your girlfriend Dolores. Tony grinned, gesturing toward the elderly waitress climbing down from his truck's passenger seat. She memorized the license plate on Webb's SUV, called it in to Ray here. Turns out half the parents in this neighborhood have been looking for missing kids for months. The impromptu rescue team revealed itself as a cross-section of Henderson's working-class community: mechanics, construction workers, restaurant staff, and retirees who decided that waiting for official help meant watching more children disappear. They carried tire irons, baseball bats, and the righteous anger of people who discovered predators operating in their backyard. But Steven's trained paranoia was screaming warnings. Something about the setup felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed. "Detective Moretti," he called. "What's your badge number?" 7749. Moretti replied without hesitation. "Why?" "Because something's wrong," Steven said quietly to Derek. "This is too convenient, too perfectly timed." As if summoned by his suspicion, Webb's amplified voice echoed from speakers mounted on the warehouse exterior. "Mr. Seagal, I'm impressed by your friend's dedication. Unfortunately, they've just made this situation significantly more complicated." Spotlights blazed to life around the complex's perimeter, revealing the rescue team trapped in a kill zone. Armed figures emerged from concealment behind parked vehicles and shipping containers, professional soldiers who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "You see," Webb continued, his tone conversationally pleasant, "we've been monitoring police communications all evening. Detective Moretti has been very helpful in coordinating this little gathering." Derek's heart sank as understanding dawned. He's working for them. Detective Moretti's apologetic shrug confirmed the betrayal. "Sorry, folks. Nothing personal, but Victor pays better than the city pension plan." The standoff stretched taut as armed mercenaries emerged from the shadows, their military-grade weapons trained on Henderson's finest citizens. Tony gripped his tire iron like a club, his mechanic's pragmatism warring with the urge to charge. The nearest gunman, Dolores, stood protectively near a group of worried mothers, her grandmother's courage unshaken despite the overwhelming odds. Steven's mind raced through tactical possibilities, each scenario ending in civilian casualties. Webb's professionals held every advantage: superior weapons, defensive positions, and the ruthless willingness to execute innocence to maintain control. 30 seconds, Webb announced over the loudspeakers. "Then we start with the oldest civilian and work our way down." Detective Moretti kept his service weapon trained on Tony while backing toward the warehouse entrance. "This doesn't have to get messy, people. Just step aside and let the professionals handle things." But Steven had noticed something Webb's tactical mind had missed. The rescue convoy's positioning wasn't random. Tony's placement of vehicles created overlapping fields of cover, while several of the civilian rescuers carried themselves with the bearing of people familiar with combat situations. "Derek," Steven whispered, "when I move, get to Tony's truck and start the engine. Drive straight through that loading dock door." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." Steven lied smoothly. The warehouse's main door opened as Webb appeared. With 4 guards, his scarred face showing professional confidence in his overwhelming advantage. Behind him, more armed figures emerged, creating a semicircle that trapped the civilians in crossfire position. "Mr. Seagal," Webb called, "time to end this charade. Walk toward me slowly, hands visible, and we'll discuss terms for everyone else's survival." Steven stepped forward, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Each step carried him closer to the central kill zone, while his peripheral vision cataloged weapon positions, guard spacing, and potential cover. The aikido master's mind was calculating vectors and timing with lethal precision. "That's far enough," Webb commanded when Steven reached the lot center. "Now your friend." Derek emerged from behind Tony's truck, his hands raised, but his Marine training evident in his alert posture. The 2 men stood exposed under the harsh spotlights, surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block. That Webb's smile held no warmth as he savored his moment of triumph. Victor will be pleased. 2 problems solved, plus a dozen witnesses who won't be telling tales. But as Webb raised his rifle, Steven's dark eyes found something in the distance that made him smile for the first time since the crisis began. "Detective Moretti," he called out, "you might want to check your radio." Moretti frowned, touching his earpiece. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he processed what he was hearing. "Boss, we've got federal vehicles approaching from 3 directions. Real feds this time." FBI tactical trucks roared into the complex from multiple entry points, their emergency lights painting the industrial landscape in strobing red and blue. Agent Sarah Mitchell's amplified voice cut through the night. "FBI, everyone on the ground. Now." Webb's tactical advantage evaporated as federal agents swarmed the complex with military precision. His mercenaries found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by operatives who'd been planning this raid for months. Impossible, Webb snarled, his rifle swinging between Steven and the approaching agents. We monitored all police frequencies. Steven's patient smile widened. FBI uses encrypted channels. And you made one critical mistake. You assumed I was working alone. The truth revealed itself as Agent Mitchell approached with tactical backup. Steven's morning routine at Moretti's diner, his philosophical conversations with Dolores, even his presence at Derek's academy, all part of an elaborate undercover operation designed to map Kozlov's entire network. Webb's finger found his rifle's trigger as he realized the scope of his miscalculation. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Webb's rifle swung towards Steven with deadly intent, but 15 months of undercover preparation had anticipated this moment. Agent Mitchell's tactical team moved with choreographed precision, flashbang grenades creating disorienting bursts of light and sound that scattered Webb's mercenaries like startled insects. Steven flowed through the chaos with lethal grace, his aikido mastery transforming the battlefield's confusion into tactical advantage. He reached Webb before the criminal could acquire a clean shot, his hands moving in perfect harmony to redirect the rifle's barrel skyward, while his hip throw sent the scarred operative sprawling across asphalt. Derek followed Steven's example, his Marine training finally finding purpose beyond tournament competition. He tackled Detective Moretti before the corrupt cop could draw his weapon, zip-tie restraints appearing in his hands as if conjured from memory of their shared captivity. The civilian rescuers scattered for cover while FBI agents secured the complex. With overwhelming force, Tony Ricci found himself pressed against his truck by a tactical officer until Agent Mitchell confirmed his identity as a concerned friend rather than criminal accomplice. Clear voices echoed throughout the warehouse as federal teams swept through Webb's operation. Computer stations yielded encrypted hard drives containing years of financial records, while surveillance equipment revealed the scope of Kozlov's monitoring network. But Steven's priority remained singular, finding the children. He sprinted toward the auxiliary building where the monitors had shown Jenny Martinez and the other academy students, Agent Mitchell's team flanking him with weapons ready. The rescue required precise coordination. Webb's remaining guards had taken defensive positions around the holding cells, using the children as human shields while demanding safe passage. Steven's negotiation skills, honed through decades of federal service, gradually convinced them that surrender offered their only chance of survival. Jenny emerged from her cage with tears streaming down her face, but her martial arts discipline intact. She'd spent the terrifying hours teaching younger children breathing exercises, using the meditation techniques Derek had taught her to maintain calm in impossible circumstances. "Sensei Steven," she whispered as he cut through her restraints. "I knew you'd come." The full scope of Webb's operation revealed itself as FBI teams processed the evidence. 43 victims ranging in age from 14 to 25, all recruited through legitimate martial arts tournaments before disappearing into Kozlov's underground fighting circuit. Financial records showed millions of dollars flowing through shell companies, while communication logs revealed connections to similar operations across multiple states. Derek stood among the rescued fighters, his tournament victories now seeming insignificant compared to the real victory unfolding around him. Young men and women who'd vanished from their families were finally going home, their nightmare ended by the coordinated efforts of federal agents and concerned citizens. Agent Mitchell approached Steven as medical teams began treating the rescued victims. 15 months of deep cover work, she said with professional admiration. One of the longest federal investigations in Bureau history. Steven nodded, but his attention remained focused on Jenny and the other children receiving medical attention. Was it worth the wait? Kozlov's entire West Coast network is finished, Mitchell confirmed. Your patience and Derek's inadvertent challenge gave us everything we needed to dismantle the operation permanently. Webb lay zip-tied and semi-conscious near his overturned rifle, his tactical confidence replaced by the bitter realization that he'd been outmaneuvered by superior planning and deeper patience. The scarred operative who'd terrorized dozens of victims now faced life imprisonment for his crimes. But as celebration began among the rescued families, Agent Mitchell's radio crackled with urgent communication from the FBI's Miami field office. Her expression darkened as she processed the incoming information. "Steven," she called, her voice carrying new tension. "We have a problem." Agent Mitchell's radio transmission shattered the moment of victory like glass breaking in the desert. Night. Steven's expression shifted from relief to grim anticipation as she relayed the devastating news from Miami. "Kozlov's gone," Mitchell reported, her professional composure barely containing frustrated anger. "Fled his penthouse 6 hours ago, probably triggered by our radio traffic. Private jet filed a flight plan to Moscow, but we lost tracking over international waters." Derek felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. "He got away. Worse than that," Mitchell continued, studying additional intelligence flowing through her encrypted communications. "Before leaving, he activated what appears to be a dead man's switch. Financial institutions across 3 states are reporting massive fund transfers, shell companies liquidating assets, and operational cells going dark." Steven's jaw tightened as decades of experience with criminal networks painted the full picture. "He's cutting loose ends. Anyone who could testify against him becomes a liability." The warehouse complex buzzed with federal activity as evidence teams processed Webb's operation, but the victory felt hollow knowing the ultimate architect of the crimes had escaped. Rescued victims were receiving medical attention while there. Families arrived for emotional reunions. Yet the shadow of Kozlov's continued freedom darkened every smile. Agent Mitchell's phone rang with urgent priority tone. She answered immediately, her face growing increasingly grim as she listened to the caller. "Understood. We're en route." "What now?" Steven asked. "Kozlov's retaliation has already begun," Mitchell replied, her voice tight with controlled urgency. 3 federal witnesses entered protective custody this morning are missing from safe houses. 2 prosecutors who worked Kozlov cases have been targeted for assassination. And there's something else. She paused, checking her encrypted messages, before continuing with visible reluctance. "Intelligence suggests Kozlov has activated a sleeper cell specifically tasked with eliminating you, Steven. Professional killers who've been in deep cover for years, waiting for exactly this situation." Derek looked between Steven and Agent Mitchell, his newfound understanding of their world revealing new depths of danger. "How many?" "Unknown," Mitchell admitted. "But Kozlov's organization has been planning contingencies for federal infiltration since its inception. They've had 15 years to embed assets, recruit local criminals, and establish backup operations." Steven's response came with the calm acceptance of someone who'd accepted such risks long ago. "Then we finish what we started." Steven, Mitchell's voice carried the authority of federal command. "I'm placing you in protective custody immediately. Kozlov's reach extends further than you realize, and no," Steven interrupted, his tone patient but immovable. "Hiding protects me, but leaves everyone else vulnerable. These people," he gestured toward the rescued victims and civilian rescuers, "they're all potential targets now because they helped expose his operation." Tony Ricci, overhearing the conversation, stepped forward with typical blue-collar directness. "So what do we do? Sit around waiting for Russian hitmen to show up at our jobs?" The question hung in the air as sirens approached from multiple directions. Local police, additional federal units, and medical vehicles responding to the massive law enforcement operation. But despite the overwhelming official presence, everyone understood that bureaucratic protection had limitations against an enemy with unlimited resources and decades of criminal experience. Jenny Martinez approached with her grandmother Dolores, both women showing the strain of their ordeal, but maintaining the dignity that had first attracted Steven's respect. "Mr. Steven," Jenny said quietly, "what happens to our academy now?" Steven looked at the young woman who'd maintained courage under impossible circumstances, then at Derek, whose arrogance had been transformed into genuine leadership through adversity. Around them, parents reunited with missing children while federal agents processed evidence that would destroy a criminal empire. But Kozlov's escape cast a shadow over every reunion, every moment of relief. The immediate battle was won, but the war continued. The academy represents everything Kozlov fears, Steven told Jenny, his voice carrying new determination. People learning to protect themselves and others, communities coming together against predators, young leaders who refuse to be victims. Agent Mitchell's radio crackled again with priority traffic. She listened intently before turning back to the group with an expression that mixed professional concern with grudging admiration. Kozlov just released a video message through encrypted channels, she reported. He's offering $10 million for Steven's death and $5 million for anyone who helped in tonight's operation. The warehouse fell silent as the magnitude of the threat settled over everyone present. Kozlov's revenge would extend far beyond Steven to encompass every person who'd participated in exposing his crimes. Derek stepped forward, his Marine training overriding civilian instincts for self-preservation. Then we stand together. Steven nodded slowly, recognizing in Derek's words the same commitment that had driven his own decades of service. The greatest victory wouldn't be personal survival. It would be protecting the community that had found courage to fight back. Against evil, the battle was far from over, but they would face whatever came next as they had faced this night. Together, united by the bonds forged in fire and the unshakable belief that some things were worth any sacrifice, as dawn approached. Over the Nevada desert, Steven realized that Derek's foolish challenge at a Henderson diner had become something far greater than either man could have imagined. The foundation of a community that would never again allow evil to flourish in the shadows, no matter what form it might take. The work continued, but the circle was complete. And in that completion, there was peace. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.